and sensitive, and not only pay attention to my words, but understand my words have meaning and can do harm. And older generations, not everybody, this is not a generalization, but older generations are generally the ones that go, I don't care about your feelings, and everybody wants me to be PC or super woke, and that's not how I want to show up. And
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor, and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black Executive Perspective.
Welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters related to race, especially race in corporate America. I'm your host, TonyTidbit.
And I'm your co-host, Chris P. Reed. We always want to start off by shouting out our partner, Code M Magazine, whose mission is saving the Black family by first saving the Black man. That is Code M Magazine, 2 M's, codemmagazine.com. Please check them out.
Yeah, definitely check out our partners. They're awesome. And so today I want you to check out our guest that's going to join the Black Executive Perspective podcast, Robert Franklin II. And he will come on and talk about his personal experiences, upbringing, and generational perspectives on how those influences, how he navigates and looks at the world. We'll dive into the encounters with racism and discrimination, discussing how his generation has shaped his responses. We'll also examine whether approaches to these challenges differ across generations and how age and experience play a role in the fight against racism.
Before we get too deep into it, let me give a little flavor on Mr. Robert Franklin II. He's led diversity, health equity, and inclusion efforts at the Children's Hospital, Colorado since 2018 and consults nationwide on community engagement. His experience includes leading diversity catalyst teams at Colorado State University, training for the city, county of Denver, and serving as a health equity officer for the Colorado Public Health Association. As a published author and podcast host, Robert co-founded 7 Focus with Prismatic LLC, a company dedicated to improving organizational diversity by fostering learning and dialogue rooted in the belief that the actions today are shaped by the 7 generations before. Very, very intriguing stuff. So, Robert Franklin II, welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, sir.
Gentlemen, Grand Rising, and thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
That's cool. Well, give us a little bit of view from your perspective. Where are you currently located? Tell us a little bit about you, yourself, and your family.
Yeah, man, I am a Colorado kid, born and raised in Denver, Colorado. And although I am or was a military brat, I spent most of my life here in Colorado, raised our kids here. It's a great place to raise your kids. So we got a 22-year-old and a 15-year-old. And I tell you, they make me older every day. But it is the most onerous position I've ever had and the best one for sure, because, you know, the children are our future type situation. I think it's probably easy to understand. I identify as a Black man who was raised here in the United States. And so I really appreciate this space to get with some other Black dudes and really have a good conversation and some fellowship.
Well, buddy, number one, thanks for attending and coming. We're excited to hear what you want to talk about today. I mean, obviously, I think it's something that's going to resonate with our audience because I think it's something that's very relatable to everyone, regardless of what color or creed or race they are. But I want to back up a second because I just want to make sure I heard what you said. You said, you're talking about your kids, and you said, did you say honorary or ornery? Okay, because I was like, you ornery about the kids, or was I just want to make sure I heard it right. Okay.
Onerous is the word I use.
Okay, so, buddy. All right.
That's a little bit of both. It put both of those together. So
okay. I just want to make sure. And then I want to ask you this too, because I noticed this, and obviously your name is Robert Franklin II, but you spell it as an alias as RAWBERT. Right. So explain what Robert. Talk to us a little bit about that pronunciation and the way it's spelled.
Yeah. RAW is capitalized because respect and wonder is how I start. So RAW is raw, right? It's a real raw perspective or a raw understanding of the world. But respect and wonder, RAW is what that comes from. And it's way back when I was working in education. Kids would want to call me Mr. Franklin. And I was like, no, I'm not old enough for that. So you can call me Mr. Robert. And they would go, Robert. And I like that. And so I kept it when I was DJing. I kept it when I was working in schools. And so it stuck.
I love it, man. I love it. So speaking about things sticking, talk to us a little bit about why you wanted to come on the Black Executive Perspective podcast, talk about this topic, my brother.
Well, number one, you all are talking in spaces and about things that are really important to me and near and dear to my heart. And so you opened up the opportunity. So that's number one. But number two, I'm a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. So I'm doing a lot of training, a lot of consulting, as you heard Chris read the bio. And so I'm often thinking about things that I need another perspective on. And so the Black Executive Podcast, Perspective Podcast, is an opportunity for me to ask you some questions, both of y'all, from a DEI perspective on the work that we're doing and maybe the ways that I'm feeling. I wonder if y'all feel the same ways that I feel. And so this is a great place for me to start and to ask. And I'm sure your listeners are going to feel the type of way too.
Buddy, I mean, listen, I think you teed it up perfectly. So you ready to talk about it, my brother?
Are you ready? That's the question.
All right, my man, let's talk about it.
Right. So
let me ask this though, guys. This fellowship is very important, but I think we would go underserved if we didn't get into the many hats that you've worn previously, especially the educational one, because that's actually paramount to me. When you said that you're an educator by trade or by design, and so you're continuing that path just in a different vein. So could you share your background and describe the era in which you gained your grounding, especially as it relates to diversity or DEI and B?
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for adding the B. I wonder if you're going to add the J and the A and so on and so forth. That's a whole podcast conversation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I've been an educator my whole life. My mother was a teacher. I have aunties who were teachers. And really, I'm here because of the educators in my life. And so I just always knew that's what I wanted to be, whether it was an English teacher, history teacher, whatever. So I got my teaching license almost right out of college and thought that I was going to be a social studies teacher. The first job I got, a job offer I got, was for about $26,000. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money today, but in 2006, it was a good amount of money.
Right.
Then the city and county of Denver offered me $38,000 to be the after school program, out of school time guy. So think after school program, summer camp, stuff like that. $38,000. Well, so that meant that even in 2006, that meant ramen not all the time. And so I was all for that opportunity, and those same skills like social studies, history, math, science, we were just bringing it after school. So we take those same ideas that they were learning in class that some of them maybe didn't get in class and apply it to the basketball court, or apply it to launching rockets, or apply it to baking crafts, or whatever that is. So Chris, I've been educating kids because that's where I think is the place that I'm best suited. Mm-hmm. Since I was a not kid anymore. And then because of the dimensions of difference, which I know we're going to talk about, because not every kid needs the same thing in a classroom or outside the classroom, I ended up teaching teachers how to educate a kid who has some behavioral challenges. I ended up teaching about, what about a kid whose language is not English? What about a kid whose family is going through some challenges or experiencing homelessness? And so I would train those teachers or educate those educators on how to do their job better. And I got known for talking about the dimensions of difference and how that impacts our work. And, a decade and a half later, I opened up my own consulting firm now, not in education, but across industries, across the nation. And that's given me the opportunity to work with some awesome people, not only in the youth spaces, but in the community serving spaces and the corporate spaces, and brought me here to y'all in the BEP.
That's awesome. Look, let's dive into that, because that's, one of the things, being a teacher, I love the raise that you got over a couple of years, right? It went from not ramen all the time to maybe ramen and hot dogs.
That's right.
But you still be able to make it happen, and you were moving up. But talk a little bit about, because being a teacher today, I have friends of mine that are teachers. They struggle with it. You just got finished talking about all the different dimensions. I'm going to use your term, dimensions, when you're teaching all different type of kids, from different languages to maybe behavioral issues to family issues. There's a lot of going on that when you were, probably in college, learning about being a teacher, they probably didn't go over all those things, right? And then you started teaching the teachers, helping them become more equipped to be able to navigate all the different type of students that they would have in their class and make a difference. So talk about that dimension of differences make a difference.
Yep.
I think that's unique, and I think that's something people need to dive into and hear more about.
Yeah. So the dimensions of difference I train on all the time, that all of the identities we have, all the experiences we have make up who we are and impact our learning, impact our work, impact how we communicate. And so if you're a teacher out there, first of all, shout out to the teachers who are still doing it, because you're right, Tony, it's hard right now. And I don't know that I would go back to the classroom unless it was kindergarten or first grade. That's probably where I would be. And it's really hard. So those who are doing a great job right now, thank you so much for doing it. But if you're a teacher or an educator out there and you're not paying attention to the ways that race, ethnicity, age, gender, orientation, citizenship, and the list goes on, impacts how your students learn, you miss the boat. Point blank, period. You're missing on all those stories and all those opportunities to shift the learning environment so that they can learn, so that they can grow, so that you can do your job. And so I was teaching on that because I knew that from firsthand as a young Black man who was gang involved, who had drugs and alcohol in his life, whose family was not traditional, if you will. I could have been a statistic, but so many of my teachers, and even the folks that weren't like teachers, that they're paraprofessionals or coaches or whatever, they would go, I see you, and I know your story is different. I'm going to approach you in a different way, and I know you can do it. And I'm going to hold you to a high standard, and I'm not going to treat you like every other kid and expect the same results. That I learned very quickly was what kept me alive and kept me engaged and made me want to do that for other kids. And then if I can do that with a teacher, then that teacher is touching, 25 other kids and so on and so forth. You get the ripple effect. So yeah, I talk about the dimensions of difference. And that's what I wanted to ask you, Tony, because I was born in 82, right? So I like to say I'm alive. I've been alive for 5 different decades, although I'm not 50 years old. But I wonder if when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, Chris, if my sense on diversity, equity, inclusion, and these dimensions of difference is different than yours because we didn't grow up the same way and we're not the same age. And that's the question that I wanted to bring to you.
Yeah, I mean, so buddy, first I want to applaud you, okay, about having that type of mindset and being willing to adapt to not just the curriculum, but to the individuals that was in your classroom, right? Because a lot of times teachers don't do that, right? And then when you don't do that, a lot of kids get missed or think they slip through the cracks because it's not an individual. It's not, to your point, they're not pivoting to that person's individual situation, right? And I'm going to answer your question, but I definitely want to give an example because you talked about, you being a troubled youth and somebody spoke to your difference. So they said, I see you, but I'm going to come at you a different way. So I want to hear what that way is. Now, to answer your question, so number one, yes, I agree with you that based on our generation, how we grew up, how words change, how definitions change, people could see things or equate things totally different from a generational standpoint. My challenge, though, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I don't care what generation you came up in. If you know what diversity means, if you know what equity means, and you know what inclusion means, I don't see those words being different 30 years ago, 100 years ago. Now, people might not accept them, but in terms of the definition of what they mean, it's like, Chris and I had one of our guests who was on our earlier podcast a few weeks ago, Josh Moon, okay, who lives in Alabama, okay?
Yep.
And he said on the podcast, he was like, and he's a white guy. He was like, look, I never thought that there would be so much pushback against diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right. Those 3 words is something that everybody should be open arms to, regardless of what color or gender or whatever the case may be. So I was a little long-winded in answering your question, but I don't think from a generational standpoint, at least for me, that those 3 words would mean something different than it did in 1950, 1970, and 2024.
Okay, that's really interesting, and that's why I wanted to come and talk to you about it. I definitely want to see. I'm gonna dig deeper, and I got a follow up question. You did ask about my youth, and
Yep.
so I was treated. I don't know. I want to call it differently. I was seen as a kid that was struggling socially at home and looking for the reason I was gang involved is because I was looking to fill a hole emotionally and mentally, and so my teachers gave me purpose that they didn't have to give to me, and they certainly wasn't a part of their job. So I love to write and tell stories, and I can't remember a teacher who never gave me that opportunity. I'm not talking like show and tell. I'm talking from fifth grade on. Teachers made space for me to express myself through story in different ways, so English or math or whatever, and they knew that that was the way to get to me and for me to be able to stick and stay and to really value education. And I didn't know that was going on until I was in college learning how to be a teacher. And you're absolutely right, Tony. The how to teach in a multicultural environment. They didn't talk about scaffolding for troubled youth, as it were. But what I did learn is that there are multiple ways of learning, and not every teacher can scaffold or shift the learning for everybody in the room. It's hard to do, man. You have kids in different levels, different languages, different whatevers. Some kids are sleeping in the back of the room. Some kids are hungry. All those things. How do you deal with all those things? So because I started to learn that I was a part of that as a kid, as a student, I wanted to give that back. And so that's a long way to go, saying that teachers recognize something in me. And they didn't even say it's because you're a Black kid or because you're a troubled kid. They just said, I see you and I know you have this need. And so I'm going to provide that to you. And that leads me to the follow-up question for you. How we address and value diversity isn't the same as it was even in 1982. Now, I wasn't trying to get a job in 1982, but the 70s and 80s diversity work is marked with just accepting women and people of color into jobs that they hadn't been in before, right? And so it was just about, hey, Tony, welcome. I'm going to try not to say the N-word around you or do anything that crushes your soul while you're working at this company.
It's time to rethink your protein. AgileLab's protein bars are crafted with high-quality protein, double the leucine, and enriched branched-chain amino acids, essential for optimal muscle recovery. Finally, a protein bar that works as hard as you do. So visit agilelabs.com and use the code BEP to get 20% off. That's agilelabs.com, promo code BEP.
I think we're beyond just tolerating Black and brown people in corporate space. I think we're beyond that in 2024 and want more. But there are a lot of folks, Tony, that show, and Chris, that show up in my trainings or in companies that I'm consulting on, where they go, I don't want to care about your feelings. I don't want to know how you feel about what I said. I don't want to be politically correct with all my words because I just want to be me. And often I will tell you that the younger individuals in these sessions, most of them are like, yes, totally want us to be culturally culturally humble and sensitive, and not only pay attention to my words, but understand my words have meaning and can do harm. And older generations, not everybody, this is not a generalization, but older generations are generally the ones that go, I don't care about your feelings, and everybody wants me to be PC or super woke, and that's not how I want to show up. And so that I wanted to ask you, like, and you said it's the same because I think you and I think alike, but I wonder though if different generations see this work different.
Can I just jump in and answer? Because I know Chris is chomping at the bit, but I just want to, because Chris, him and I've been doing this long enough. I can know his facial expressions, but I just want to answer exactly your point. Then, Chris, you got it, buddy. So here's the thing, Ron. See, the reason they're two different things is because they mean the same. The challenge is that back in 70, and I can't even say that because that's not true either. But when you have people trying to hijack and create and make the word and weaponize the word, okay, and basically try to take the older generations and says, this is what they're trying to do to you. This is what they're trying to take from you. You worked hard. Nobody cared about your feelings, blah, 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 blah. So, of course, there would be a negative connotation of a pushback towards it because you being indoctrinated that this is bad. This is something that's not for you. This is something that is going to be against you. Okay. Now, if you took that part out, right? Let's be fair. If you took that narrative out of people trying to push and make it divisive, then and again, maybe I'm naive, but at the end, and yes, it's always going to be people push back. They push back against affirmative action. They did. Yep. So that's always going to be the case. But my point is, based on the example that you gave, that's really why we have a lot of that today. Chris.
Y'all ready? All right. Strap in. So it just so happens, ironically, that Tuesday I just did a call, and basically the flyer was an older white male, probably in his young 50s, in a suit, and it said why I'm a diversity hire. And the reason why that is because we may be talking about racial diversity. Of course, there's socioeconomic diversity, there's age diversity, there's geographic diversity, all these things that we encompass into this pot that we call diversity. But the reality of it is we've allowed, like Tony said, the weaponization, and they've co-opted to have diversity equal Black folk. Exactly. And that's not valid because you need a white dude. And I used the example in my conversation on Tuesday, the movie Boomerang in 1992, a movie called Boomerang came out. It's my favorite movie ever. I've seen it numerous times. And what I thought at the time as a young man, a young uneducated man like yourself, was that this is the most diverse work environment because they all Black up in there. They all Black up in there. And I never even imagined coming from the Midwest that you could walk into a place and have on suits and your boss be Black and your boss's boss be Black and everybody's Black, but that wasn't a diverse work environment.
Exactly.
That was an all Black work environment.
Right. Exactly.
And so we have to make sure that we qualify the fact that we need all of us. If you look up the term definition for diversity, it's a cornucopia of all these things blending together to make the greatest good for everyone. It's utilitarian in theory. Yeah. And so the concept of racial diversity, is what we're speaking of here, is that you do have to have an understanding that it can't just fine and all y'all can work here and y'all all Black now.
Or all white.
That's not the answer. Exactly. All inclusive is not diversity.
A diverse set of people and principles and perspectives, right?
So with that being said, you have a conversation with the older white people that are in charge and let them know you are part of diversity. You ingratiate them in order to get them invested in the concept of diversity, because then once you peel that back and they realize the revelation that diversity doesn't mean Black, minority doesn't mean Black, because women are taking more minority credits than anything else since the minority legalities came along. But the moral of the story is diversity means everyone. And so any idea of when you see a disparity in everyone being represented, that's when you have an imbalance.
Correct.
In the diversity. So diversity means balance as far as I'm concerned in that regard. But go ahead.
So I love what you're saying. And when I talk about the diversity and what's the definition of it, I just say difference.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Diversity equals difference. And so,
exactly.
If I'm in a room full of white folk, there's difference in the room. What are we doing to get to that? And right. Again, generationally, it's hard to talk about where I'm from, what my first language was, how I learned what is good versus evil, what I believe about the universe. It's hard to get into that in the boardroom or at around the water cooler, as it were. And when I was teaching, and I know my kids that are still my kid that's still in school, they are talking about those dimensions of difference. And so when our son is 15, when he comes into the workplace, he's going to expect that organization will talk about those dimensions of difference. But I tell you, my mom didn't get to have that conversation when she was at work, and she was a government employee. So that's a whole nother level. And so I hear both of you really actually explaining that maybe it's not a generational difference, that maybe there's something else. I just feel like, because I wasn't alive in the 60s and 70s, to know if this generation's version of racism, of xenophobia, of homophobia is the same as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. but maybe that's what I'm hearing. That's
I'll
not.
say this. I'll say, it's perspective.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because it's perspective. So one
Go ahead,
man's
Chris. Yeah.
one man's xenophobia is another man's nationalism, patriotism.
Ooh, say it
You
again.
dig?
Say
You
it
dig?
again.
You dig?
Oh.
so so it's hard, man. It's hard to have those conversations, those arguments with people that are dug in. I think the aperture of the mind being open and receptive, like your son's will be when he gets to that level,
Yeah.
is what's going to help him ingratiate and incorporate, some of these different nuances, whether it be trans or women or women in charge. I mean, think about this. Think about dress codes. Think about jeans in the corporate. I still wore suits because that's how I grew up and wear dudes. If you had a air conditioned job, you wore suits to work. You know what I mean? And so it's nuanced in your personal preference of how you saw yourself as that young man. And luckily, when you were that young man, somebody tapped you on the shoulder and made you look at yourself differently than some of the peers that you had that didn't ever have that perspective, and they end up going down a different path. But I always think about my rights and my lefts that I made, and I have people that aren't here anymore and things of that nature. And it wasn't just, I would love to say it was all us. It was all Black folks that stood up for me and looked out for me, but it was a coalition. It was a coalition of we used to get bussed out to the white church sometimes. You know what I mean? It was one of them kind of situations. So, but I think that having that perspective, having that exposure expands expectations, right? And so I expect more. I don't think that we still have a lot of ways to go in the fact that everybody that's a certain hue and skin and a certain size is a threat or is a danger. Right. And I think the media demonizes people selectively. Me and Tony had talked a long time about the OJ mugshot, how they darkened it up and all that kind of stuff. So it's tough to go against the machine. My question to you, and then Tony, I'll let you jump in. My question to you is, you are swimming upstream as an educator, fighting against systemic implementations of lack of diversity, systemic barriers, because when you think about the fact that if you have you as a male Black teacher, I went to a school, Illinois State University, renowned for teaching. We had a very low threshold of Black male teachers. And one of the professors there explained historically why. And that is because if you have a Black male teaching a young white person, mostly female, that Black men can be cool, can be respectful, can be articulate, that's a threat to some of the supremacy that they want to perpetuate and allow for in the future. So if you indoctrinate them early that Black men can be cool, they can be respectful, they can be this and that, you want to hold off on that as long as you can if you're a person of power or a supremacist that wants to make sure you keep the narrative alive. And we've had shows on the fact that narrative has been one of the biggest detriments to us as a country being united than anything else. Now it's the border and this other stuff, but it's those type of messages that resound in the generational perspective that people are holding on to, and they're recycling this in a straight out lie and information at this point in time. So there are very few, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir here. There's very few Black male teachers that are out there, but it's bigger than what you may have thought it was in the past. It was designed in that way. So when you got in there and became a maverick and started training the trainers, how did that get received?
Well, so man, this is I got goosebumps because what you just named is one of my pressures. So I told you I'm in Denver, Colorado, right? Mm-hmm. So we're about 2% of the population, Black individuals across Colorado. It's more dense in the Denver metro area, but there's not that many of us, period. Mm-hmm. And also in the education profession. And so what you're naming, Chris, is a weight that I carry every day that I get up, that I think I might be the first or only Black dude in a lot of people's lives. And that means something to me. And especially because I carry that. I didn't have a Black male teacher, like a straight up educator, classroom teacher who wasn't the gym teacher until I was in high school. Okay. He happened to be a Q, which was my first Black educator. It was a Q dog. That was a big deal for me to receive the first one. And then after that, my drill sergeant in ROTC. Those are the only two that I had all the way through K-12 education. Mm-hmm. So I know that if I'm the only one that you might see or that they might see, that I need to do the best. I gotta be on point, not just respectful and educated, but also gracious and honoring and caring and all, and still be able to spit a couple of rhymes from Tupac to Kendrick Lamar, because those black males in the room, black women, black males, whoever in the room, they also have an expectation of what is blackness and how does it show up in me. Mm-hmm. So I carry that with me, man. You gave me goosebumps, but that's the weight that I carry, because I know what it's like to not have that experience for so long.
Absolutely. And just akin with you in this regard, I have multiple degrees, even at advanced levels, and I've only had one black teacher in the 6th grade. Her name was Miss Locker. Shout out Miss Joan Locker. Hopefully she's still alive. But I've never had any other black teacher at any other level, at any training or anything at any time.
Wow. I can't say that. I had, growing up in Detroit, Michigan, I had black teachers. Okay. And it always depends on what school I attended, but I had black teachers. But here's the thing, though, buddy. I want to back up, because I want to get back to, because I want to dive into, some of the racial bias, because we want to talk about experiences too, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of how they affect our outlook, or how we see things. And so going back to what you and Chris was just talking about a few minutes ago, about was it more race? Our kids today, obviously, they see things, and their definition of things are totally different. It's more empathetic. It's more inclusive. It's more inclusive. It's more in all things, right? Not just in race, but in gender and LGBT, all those things, right? Here's the thing, though. The difference from years ago to today is, years ago, we were just trying to get our foot in, right? When you're getting your foot in, you ain't talking about, I ain't doing that. You're not talking about, I need you to listen to my feelings. You're not talking about that, right? So you're just trying, if you look at someone like, I'm a big, I've been in the advertising industry for almost 30 years, right? And when I remember the show Mad Men came out. Did you guys ever watch Mad Men?
Mm-hmm. A little bit. Mm-hmm.
Okay, a little bit, Robert, but you, Chris, right? Mm-hmm. Remember when they hired the black secretary? Mm-hmm. Okay, and they didn't even want to put her in the front. They wanted her to be in the back. They didn't even want her to be at the front door. And this was in the 60s. All right. And she was one, right? So she wasn't, and she had everything coming at her. She was just trying to keep a job. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that type of situation, it also reminds me, I saw the biography of Jesse Owens. Right. Mm-hmm. And, Jesse Owens went through a bunch of stuff, and then, obviously won four gold medals in the 1936 Olympics. And then obviously years later, he had kids, and, he was telling in the biography, he was telling his kids the story about when he got his medals. Mm-hmm. And they had an honor for him in the United States, a dinner in his honor, because he won 4 gold medals. Okay. And he told the story that what happened was they ushered him in the back, okay, through the kitchen. He came out on stage. They gave him a round of applause. They put the medals on him. Okay. And thank you. He said a couple of words. Then they ushered him back through the kitchen and out the door. And the dinner was supposed to be in his honor. Okay. And so his kids, and this is the point I'm trying to get to. His kids, now he's telling this story, and his kids are in, this is in the 70s. And his kids like, I can't believe you dealt with that. I wouldn't have dealt, I would have told them to shove their medal. And he's like, what are you talking about? That's how it was back then. So my point is, as generations go on and things become more loose and more normal, then they're benefiting today, our kids. All right. And the mindset and being able to see these things. And now they can say, I don't want to show up. All right. Or I'm not going to be taught that way. Mm-hmm. Or, this was discrimination, or you can't say that. Where generations before, we saw that, but we couldn't say that because we were just trying to survive and break through. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So, advertising. I remember that you said that's where you were professionally. So I'm gonna get to that in a second. Shout out to Don Chambers. That was the black secretary that y'all were speaking about.
Yes,
On
exactly,
Mad Men.
exactly on Mad Men.
And as I'm looking at her picture on the internet, I'm looking at her hair, and I was just thinking about women, black women in those days, and even today, what their hair has to be like in order to be accepted or to be in the front of the office. I haven't watched that episode, but I think I get what y'all are talking about. And so I thinking from an advertising perspective, Tony, have you heard of the Crown Act?
Mm-hmm.
I have not.
The Crown Act. Chris, you knew it.
Absolutely.
What do you know about the Crown Act?
Well, one of the things that was big here in Texas was a young man kept getting suspended because he wouldn't cut his hair, wouldn't wear his hair.
Yeah, the hair. Yeah. I have. But go ahead, buddy. Not in depth though. Go ahead.
Yeah. So no, that was the primary thing is he was being punished for the way in which he was able to wear his hair, which is not conducive to how everybody else could wear their hair. Therefore, it alienated him and caused him, discomfort at least, and was suspended from school multiple times in this instance. But there's other things that, to get into the Crown Act, the reality of it is when you talk about these Jim Crow-esque type of things where they always try to tiger-proof the course, right? Like if it's something that can't be done, then, Paul, and I've said this before on a previous episode, Paul Mooney said, be careful about being too happy about something because white folks come take it from you. So anything that allows for you to differentiate yourself, and the reality of it is, it's gotten harder because the world has gotten smaller due to advertising mass media, right?
Correct.
So what happened is we had a small town in Illinois where I'm from that it was all white folks and they kept it there. And so it wasn't, like you said, a lot of these people, you were the first person of color that they were able to be exposed to. Well, that's almost impossible now if a kid has a tablet. That's almost impossible now if they're watching TV. You can't insulate the racism and cultivate it in the way in which it used to be able to be cultivated. It was a very strong and powerful thing because you can keep that all in West Virginia if you so desired. You can keep that all in wherever, in the Appalachians.
Those images, right?
Absolutely.
Keep them
absolutely.
there, right? Because nobody else would see them. It's like, this ain't Korea, North Korea now.
Absolutely. And so it's a harder fight. So they're coming with harder tactics. But the reality of it is people are making more conscious efforts, and it's not a implicit bias as it used to be. It's not unconscious anymore. Now you're consciously saying, I just don't like these folks, or I just don't like foreigners, or I just don't, because you've had enough examples sprinkled in due to diversity, the efforts of diversity, to where every now and then you get a good one, shown in your face. You get a good one. And that's for all races. That's not just because there's some low down white folks too. Yeah. And there's some poor white folks too. People think that welfare is propagated by, minorities and all that kind of stuff. Like these perpetuated myths have to be, we talk about, Tony say it all the time. Don't believe me. Go look it up for yourself. For sure. And so the advent of the internet and mass media and TV and things like that, a lot of people that I speak to talk about Cliff and Claire Huxtable as the archetype or the catalyst for, I can't believe both of them went to school. Both of them. You got a doctor and a lawyer. Like that was.
And they're still together.
Man.
Raising a family. And they got money. And they're going. And kids are going to good schools.
Exactly. And they wasn't flamboyant. They lived. They never went on big vacations and this, that, and so some of these things, some of these media opportunities, we embraced wholeheartedly, and I think they perpetuated, moved the culture. People talk about different world, making them want to go and join fraternities and understand HBCUs and things of that nature. The concept of being taught, the way in which you did it, I applaud, because that was actively being doused. Like they were not trying to have another Robert be created. They didn't want you to proliferate or grow the legion of male black teachers. I don't know if there's an association of male black teachers, kind of like the journalism thing. What's the journalism thing called, Tony? The National Association of Black Journalists. Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know if it's a black association of teachers.
Not out here.
So,
exactly. But Robert, it's a different group, but that's not what we call it. Yeah.
But Robert, why did you ask about the Crown Act, my brother?
Because to where I think where Chris was going, the Crown Act is enacted legislation in only certain states, and I have not checked lately. The last time I checked, it was only about 17 states where it makes it illegal to discriminate against someone wearing their hair in their quote natural style, or one that is connected to their own self-expression, and for some of us, is connected to our ethnicity or racial identity and self-expression and so on. And I bring that up, especially looking at Dawn Chambers and her hair, because I'm guessing that was not the natural way of her wearing her hair, but it had to be how she wore to be accepted in the Mad Men scenario.
Right.
And so I bring this to you. That's what I wanted to bring to you. And Chris, you laid out a perfect example. The reason the Crown Act was enacted or is being enacted first by Dove and the subsidiary marketing companies that are connected to Dove, because it was a media frenzy opportunity to say, look, we are sensitive. We are culturally humble to you folks. And that's why we want to build the Crown Act. It doesn't, though, keep someone from still having that microaggression or that bias experience. And so I wanted to check in with you both and wonder if you think generationally this is because of how old I am. So many years ago, I had hair a little higher than what it is now, a lot higher than what it is now. I had some inches on my hair, and I was walking around trying to get to a point where I could lock it. So you can imagine there's a lot more hair than I have today. And I'm sitting in the C-suite of this organization I'm working in, and the COO, the Chief Operations Officer, it's a white man of about late 40s at that time, reaches out and he says, "Oh man, I want to touch your hair. It looks so cool." I was 2 years on the job. And I tell you both vulnerably, I was fearing for my life. And it wasn't like I thought he was going to kill me, but like I had the kind of fear and anxiety that I didn't know what I was supposed to do in that moment. I have heard Black women talk about people wanting to touch their hair for my whole life. Been raised by Black women. I know it happens, but it had never happened to me in a professional space. I didn't know what to do. And all I could do was lean back and say, no, and trying to laugh it off. But I was shook for weeks. Had to call my mom and get some counseling and all that because I was so shook. I wonder, Tony, to your point, that Carl Lewis and Jesse Owens would have just been like, yeah, that's just Tuesday. But to me,
exactly, right?
I felt like this needed action. I needed a rule. I needed the Crown Act at the moment. I needed something to be able to do because this is not acceptable. I could not accept it.
Yeah, buddy. I mean, look, at the end of the day, and so again, those are the things that for centuries we dealt with, right? Again, we were bringing up movies. If you remember, what was the flick with Leonardo DiCaprio? I cannot pronounce his name. And Jamie Foxx was in the flick with
12 Years a Slave.
No.
Django.
Django, right?
Yep.
And then remember, Samuel Jackson was like Leonardo's dog, right? And he was sitting there thinking he was rubbing his head like a dog, right? So think, and that ain't made up, okay? That's for real, okay? So to be fair, we've come a long way. But the question I have for you, my brother, because I love that you've been in this space, you've been doing DEI for a long time. You talk about the dimensions of difference. Talk a little bit about the different responses that you've seen from the different generations when it comes about race or stuff to that nature. Do you see it different? Do you see it's not the same? I mean, you see it similar, or you just say it's just totally different?
I can't tell you how many times, I can't count how many times somebody said, well, in my generation, we didn't blah, blah, blah. We didn't talk like this. We didn't have those words. We didn't see it that way. And as I'm getting older, I've said it too. In my old age, I will look at a person's body and I will say, yes, ma'am, or no, sir, based on what I think they look like. And part of that is because of how I was raised. Part of that is because of what I think I know about their body. And so 90%, 95% of the time, I'm right. Yes, sir, no, ma'am, whatever. Sometimes I'm not. And it's because of how I was raised. And so the different generations, I think, when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, have a different perspective on how to be in this year and this time of our lives. Certainly that is the case. I think if we look at politics, there are a lot of our colleagues who have never talked about politics or religion at work. And still some folks think you shouldn't because it's inappropriate or it's divisive. And then here I come talking about, hey, we need to be vulnerable. We need to talk about these dimensions because they all matter and they all impact how we do what we do. I want to know, not only care who you're voting for, but I want to know where you stand on how we're going to move politically, socially, to get to where it is that we need to be. And that's hard for folks. So to answer your question directly, Tony, a lot of folks say, because of how old I am, this is new for me.
Mhm.
and I need more help or more grace to be able to get to where, Robert, you're telling me to go. Whereas some folks, and I've had this on the other end, Chris, when you were talking about the Jim Crow era connections to what's happening today,
Mhm.
there are a lot of people younger than myself in this work who say, you're not moving fast enough.
Mhm.
All you're doing is placating the massa, if you will, and want more than the DEI 101 that I'm really good at doing. And so there's both of these things happening at the same time. It can be a struggle certainly, and I have to scaffold if they're both in the room at the same time.
I think that, we have to rely on the data, and we have to rely on what is before us, and not just lean on to our own experiences. And so we think about the concept of, and I'm going to diverge just a little bit, interviewing someone with tattoos.
If you like what you hear and want to join us on this journey of making uncomfortable conversations comfortable, please subscribe to a Black Executive Perspective podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe now to stay connected for more episodes that challenge, inspire, and lead the change.
Okay.
There was a point in time where tattoos was for Navy people, and that was that, right? And now tattoos are more acceptable. I remember in 2000, I was working at Federal Express, and I was a courier, and we couldn't have, now think about the irony of this, and you guys are smart enough to pick on what was going on. Couldn't have earrings in, which is cool. Couldn't have goatees.
Oh.
Now, if you can grow a full beard, you could be a FedEx driver, but no goatees. Subtle. That's subtle, right? And so I always had to come in, I had to shave and take my earrings out and that type of stuff. And I was a young man, at that point. But I knew that was part of the uniform. That was part of the conformity to go along to get along that we were speaking about, because I had to get this check. Now it's so interesting when I see drivers and they got dreads and they got earrings in, and I'm like, oh, they ain't as professional as we used to be.
Yeah.
You dig? You see what happened? I got infected. I got programmed to believe that the way this person looks has a direct correlation to their productivity, to their ability, to their acumen. And those are the things that we have to fight against. Those are the impressions that we need to make sure are absolved with data, with information. But if you do this right now in this setting, anybody tell me a Black leader, high level political figure that has facial hair, then we can continue with this conversation.
Cornel West.
I've seen
Cool.
a few. Yeah, I've seen
Okay.
a few. Yeah,
Okay.
I've seen a few.
I mean, it's not many.
It's not many. And to be fair, though, they would have to have some leverage and been there a while, right?
Absolutely.
But
that's silly though. Think about that. That's small.
No.
Small.
It is small, but I just want to go back to his point, right? Because I want to ask you guys a question. Going back to the generational thing, okay? And I going back to what you were saying, Robert, about it's hard for me to do that, or Chris said that's hard for me to, they're moving too fast for me, or the younger people saying they're moving too slow for me, and we should be jumping. Is that new? I mean, because I think that's just how human beings have always been from different generations, right? I just think that the older you get, people don't like change. All right, change has always been, what's kryptonite to human beings. Okay, especially as you get older, right? Because you don't want you set in your ways. Okay, and when you're young, you see the world as, hey, why can't we do this? Why shouldn't we do this? Who said I can't do it? Right? So I just think that's always, I remember when I was a kid and my grandmother said, and see, that's what I'm saying. Even when you can't even look at race when it comes to it. Because I remember my grandmother, she was trying to get me to carry, I think I was 6 years old. She was trying to get me to carry a bucket of water up the basement stairs. And I was struggling. And she snatched it and said, your kids today are soft. I used to walk 3 miles and carry 2 buckets of water. So I don't see that being nothing but that's just always going to be the case. All right. Now, and then the antithesis of that is if all younger people, because we're moving in a direction where they see more diversity in this and that, let me ask you this question, Robert. Do you see young people that's racist? Have you heard of young people that's racist?
So what I have to be sure of is how we're defining racist.
Let me put it this way. okay, who have done racist things.
Absolutely.
Okay. So my point is, it doesn't matter that they're a younger generation.
I see.
Okay? Because they're still doing things that their mother and father and grandfather and great grandfather did because it's being taught. That's the point. You see what I'm saying? And then from the other side, because we're talking about all the things that happen to people of color, our kids say, well, we're tired of this and it should be this way.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So that's why I say the generational thing, it's just more about what's been done and people don't want to change versus younger generations saying, we want to change everything. We don't want to live by those rules. I was excited going back to Chris and I did an episode on how to navigate corporate America. And Chris kicked off the episode, said there's 3 levels. So you come in the episode, when you come into corporate America. And your first step was what, Chris?
Survive.
Correct. So when I came into corporate America, you just said it. Robert, when you came in, we were trying to survive.
Right.
Now kids come in and like, I can't be VP in 2 months. I'm out. You see my saying? So that's my perspective on it. So I would love to hear if there's any challenges on that.
Let me say this though, but I think as we talked about with the world getting so small now due to the connectivity, everything's faster and they feel like change should be appropriately as fast, or your desire or ability or acumen to change should be just like everything else. Because the problem with sticking with a bad mindset is just like having compound interest. If you can get it, then it compounds faster and it grows at a greater rate. You get in early, but the longer you hold off on it, then once you get old, you ain't got nothing for retirement because you never put away incrementally up front. And the more that they can deny that systemically, this is why Robert is an outlier to me in this regard, is because I know the system, the educational system, and I know that it wasn't designed for Roberts to thrive. Roberts or Robert, neither one of them should be thriving. For him to be taking on the mantle to allow for this exposure, to expand the expectations of these young white kids, black kids, or whatever, now they're seeing it in a different light. And now they want, hey, I can get this by ordering it. Boop, boop, boop. I can do this. I can do all these things conveniently. Why is this so difficult? Why is this change? All this other change we cool with. We cool with all the Ubers and all the everything is changing all the time. And we like, man, look at technology. Look at how great our country is and this and that. But for one thing, we want to hold on to our cold dead hands. Will they take away these, these opportunities for one set of people?
So based on that, Robert, let me ask you this final question, my man.
Yeah.
Based on what Chris was saying and based on our overall conversation. Can different generations work together to combat racial bias and discrimination in professional settings? What's your thoughts on that? And if they can, what some of the things could they do?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely, they can. They got to want to. And that's one of the toughest parts, whether you're in corporate America, in the education space, in the healthcare space. The ability, the want to work with someone who's different than you, especially from a different generation, can be hard. And so you have to want to do that. You have to look at that person who's been there for 35 years. You're new. And you're not going to be the VP the first 2 weeks, but you're new there. And you see this person's been there 30 years, and you got to say, I want to work with you. I want to learn from you. And vice versa. You look and you see these new whippersnappers who do come in with the face tattoos and the locks and the cell phones. And they were wondering how come it takes you so long to type an email type situation. Mm-hmm. And you want to learn from them. You want to work with them because we're all headed towards whatever our mission is. When that happens, it's brilliant. Intergenerational work is brilliant. And we've seen that a number of different ways in different places across our society. It's those differences that make a difference when we fight them or ignore them, which is worse. We're lack of education about the fact that I was born at a different time than you were born, and those mean things to us. Then people get into their silos and they don't want to work together. And then, to Chris's point, we're all affected negatively by the oppression that exists for all of us, even though we think it's a you problem or a me problem or whatever. So yes, absolutely. And it's going to take some work.
Let me ask you this. So if you capsulated all this into one great piece of advice or thought that you would have for the layman person that will be listening to this? Obviously, we have a diverse crowd or a diverse audience that listens to us, but
Yeah.
just to break it down into layman's terms for every man, right? What is the one thing you want for folks to walk away with from this message that you delivered to us today?
You don't know everything. And so you've got to go find information that can help you be better at or greater at what it is that you're trying to do. And there are people who have been there, done that, and come before you. And there are people who will come after you that you need to learn from so that you can do what it is that you're trying to do. So education is the key. I think we've said that a number of different times. And anyone can be your teacher, and you can be anyone's teacher. So that's what I would leave us with.
Awesome, buddy. I love it. I love it. And man, more importantly, I love this conversation, man. This was really, really insightful. And I picked up a couple of nuggets myself. And this is why these conversations are important, because obviously we're sharing different perspectives. We're sharing, and we're different generations as well, right? And it's good to hear, and more importantly, exciting to see a young brother like yourself that, who came from a tough upbringing and a tough environment, who could have been a statistic, okay,
Yeah.
who but didn't, because and this was the thing, they saw the love, they had love for you, buddy, right? And that's why they went outside of their regular teaching norm, because they had love. And if we can do that, right, if we can see each other as humans, regardless to what Chris was saying, they have a bone in their nose, or whatever the case may be, if we can see the humanity in each individual, and we're willing to, extend an olive branch for that individual, then we get individuals like Robert Franklin II. So I really appreciate you coming on, buddy. So question I have for you, how can a Black Executive Perspective podcast help you, my brother?
Two things. I think one, there's an opportunity for us to find Black male educators and lift them up. And so that's not necessarily for me. That's just, I think, how we give back to our community. And then two, point people towards 7 Focus, man. If all people got to do is look up 7 Focus LLC, and we'll be there, and we can come for keynotes, trainings, or just really dope conversations like this one.
Awesome, my man. Really appreciate it. So sit tight. We're going to do a couple of things, and Robert's going to help us with our call to action. So I think it's now time for
Tony's Tidbit.
So today's tidbit, based on what we talked about, is this: embracing our differences enriches our perspective. Each generation weaves a unique thread in the tapestry of diversity. The wisdom of the past and the energy of the present can together confront the shadows of discrimination. And you heard a lot of that today in our conversation with Robert Franklin II.
That's a good word. That's a good word. We would be remiss if we did not remind you to tune in for our weekly segment on a Black Executive Perspective podcast, Need to Know, with Dr. Nasinga Burton. This episode, this segment, Dr. Burton dives into timely and crucial topics that shape our community and world. Make sure that you tune in and listen to this sister, because she's powerful, she is outrageous, she is educated, and she is there for us. So make sure that you tune in and do not miss out on this blessing that is Dr. Nasinga Burton.
Absolutely. The hyphenated Dr. Nasinga Burton. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, Generational Responses.
And we have a mission here to decrease all forms of discrimination. A lot of this conversation was about that, illuminating some of the aspects of it. And we have a guide that helps us. And it's simply this is our call to action. It's called LESS, L-E-S-S, okay? And the L stands for learn. Educate yourself on racial and cultural nuances to make sure that you're always expanding your horizons. As we said, the world has gotten so small, there's no reason that you don't know if you have a desire to do so. Robert Franklin said it's all about the desire. And so please insert that desire.
The E is for empathy. Learn from others so that you can try to walk a mile in their shoes, because when you do that, you'll learn more from them, and that'll help you in the mission-driven work that you've got going on.
The first S is for share. And this is what we were bound to do. This fellowship that we had today was for us to share our experiences and our understandings and have some conversations. We don't always have to agree, but we definitely want to share and expose each other to different perspectives. And that's why we're here serving you.
Absolutely. And the final S is to stop. We want to actively stop discrimination as it walks in our path. So if Uncle Joe says something at the Thanksgiving table that's inappropriate, you say, Uncle Joe, we don't believe that, and you stop it right there, right? So if everyone can incorporate less, LESS, we'll build a more fairer and understanding world. And more importantly, we'll all see the change that we want to see, because less will become more.
We want you to continue to tune into these episodes as we have guest hosts who talk about different topics that you guys have provided us or inspired us to do. But go to the newsletter, sign up for the website, make sure that you review and subscribe wherever you're listening to our podcast. And Tony, help them understand where they can get us from.
Absolutely. You can follow a Black Executive Perspective podcast on all of our social channels, which is X, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram at a Black Exec. For our fabulous guests, my brother out there in Denver, Colorado, Robert Franklin II. For the co-host with the most, Chris P. Reed, always dropping the knowledge and the love. I'm TonyTidbit. We talked about it today. We learned about it today, and we love you. And guess what? We're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.